trying to find out the background, how you came to be here.
So I was on YouTube, and I won't lie, a couple of your videos popped up on my feed.
Yeah.
And I watched just the beginning of the documentary video
Right.
you did, and I see the shot.
Right.
I'm from Lewisham side, and for years, I've been looking for people here. I've seen loads of people in America, you know, follow Dr. Malachi Z. York and his teachings, but I haven't really seen anyone here promoting it as much. And I know the dynamics of US and UK is a bit different, you know, but when I realized this was in Croydon, I thought, well, I can take a trip.
Yeah.
See the shop in person, get that experience.
Oh, so this is your first time?
This is my first
time. Wow, your ancestors have actually,
And then, I walked in the shop and you're right here. I thought, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so, yeah, feel free. Now you're here, you know, ask us anything.
Okay. So I do have a question. So in the English language, we've got man, we've got mankind, and we've got human. From my knowledge, these are three separate things. They're not the same thing. I wanted to get your take on, from your knowledge, what these three things are and how did they come about.
Okay. So again, it's kind of interesting because what we were saying earlier on is just what you've done, which is, I'm going to add to that, because again, like supreme being, because you've spotted something and there's a hierarchy. So you've got supreme being, then you have a being, right? Then you have a human being, ING, human being. Then you have a human. Then you have a man, right? And you have we could say, a beast. This pen's not the best, but you have a demon. And you can keep going down, like to ghouls, etc., right? Oh, yeah, I missed that one. So you got mankind, right? Let me put that here. We got, which is what you kind of touched on. So you got mankind, yeah? Now, these are all terms that we would use without even thinking about it, because we think they're all the same. So the question you're asking is a very important question, because the highest being is a supreme being. Obviously, the word supreme means top, yeah, best quality. And then you go down the hierarchy, and the lower you go, the worse you are. So when people call themselves a human, or we say things like mankind, we're not realizing what we're actually saying in this situation is a kind of a man, because there's a distinction between a man and a kind of a man. Just as human, we don't see, I'm going to try to use a better pen, we don't see that this is made up of two words, who and man. Because most people are not familiar with who until they go into ancient Egypt, because when you're looking at words are, in the English language anyway, are put together, compound words. So, you know, we say things like understanding, right? And if someone comes along, as we do most of the time, and it's now very popular, where we're saying overstanding, initially, right, people will say, you're making up a word. How can you say overstanding? Who talks like that? What is that? But if you can have an under, you can have an over, right? So if you can have understanding, you can have overstanding. And people don't take the time when it comes to semiotics and dealing with etymology, because we were saying earlier on, language is so important and it has an effect on you. So when you start to look at the different types of, like say industry, like you have like the police, you have the legal system, you have certain systems where they have a language. In the legal, they call it legalese over here. So when you're saying understanding to someone from a legal perspective, it means something completely different. So you can get tricked. So when you're, when the police, or, they confront you and they stop you and they say, da 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 da, do you understand? You're not realizing at that point that you're actually accepting liability of something. But if you say, no, I don't, I overstand, then they can't put you under that spell, right? But going back to your question, it's like another word. If you said, try using the red, see if that's better. Yeah. Because of the word man, right? You said, you hear that word, German. You don't hear germ, man, a man of germs, or germ man. Yeah, so to go back to your question, the hierarchy starts off from being a supreme being, going all the way down to people who might even call them, who might not realize that they are actually acting like a demon, because there are demons. What makes somebody a beast? What makes somebody a demon? Because you do demonic things. You do things that another person up here will look at that like, that's very beast-like. Why would you behave and act in that way? You see, so we can delve in, but then you have to look at the natures of man relates to mammal. What makes a supreme being is a being that is using more of their mental, right? Because when you start to look at the higher states of consciousness, it deals with, it deals with the mind, because your mind is what governs how you act and behave. In a state where someone can look at you and say, that's an upright being, that's someone who's using, they say, common sense, which is not common anymore. You see, so people have lost the ability to be connected to a being who uses soul, because all of these beings are alive or exist, but not every being operates using soul, because anything alive can have a spirit, because a spirit just deals with the ability to vibrate at a particular frequency. And anything that is alive, whether it's an animal, a tree, a rock, is vibrating, it pulsates, it has a resonance frequency. But as you raise up and you're using your mind, you become a supreme being, because a supreme being will think in a way that makes sense and not do things that are going to be harmful or, harmful to other people. So, yeah, unless you want to like elaborate, the man or the mammal part is just the animal nature. Because, as I said, you can be walking around, but don't have a soul which connects you to your emotions, to have empathy, to have compassion, to have love, to have things that are on a higher vibration. The lower vibration, when you're a beast or an animal, all you deal with is what you need to what you need to survive. Yeah, go ahead. You just deal with me, myself, and I, what I put into my mouth, and how I literally just survive. You just deal with survival instincts, and that's it. And animals, again, they work off of instincts as having spirits. They're alive, but they don't know about soul. And then you have, going down this hierarchy, you have people on the planet, mainly the European, who has lost their soul. or I should say more importantly, the Adamites, yeah? The Adamites, which were created, or shall I say made, Adamites, made at a particular point in time, only 6,000 years ago. And they act and behave in a way that is inhumane. Because when you start to look at a being that uses violence, deals with war, deals with, you know, all kinds of atrocities, you have to think, what's making that person behave and act that way? It's the absence of soul.
So sorry, I wanted to follow
No,
up
go ahead.
my question. Right?
Yeah.
So you've mentioned Adamites, right?
Yeah,
And you mentioned they came about 6,000 years ago.
that's correct.
Who created the Adamites?
Okay. You know, when I said the word who, yeah, who in ancient Egypt is a being, right, that's responsible for creative will. But then those beings, they tie into our ancestors who come from outside the planet, and they came here and seeded the planet. So when you go into that, we start to talk about what people term extraterrestrials. And this planet is actually controlled by extraterrestrials. So that's why we say planet, plan ET. It's an extraterrestrial plan. The way it was germinated, the way it was seeded, the beings on the planet are related to these different types of extraterrestrials that have come from different places. So you have beings from the Pleiades star constellation, right? You got beings from Aldebaran, of Taurus. You have beings from Orion, from Sirius. And these are all constellations that are mentioned in the Bible. But in the biblical teachings, they used to teach it to you as heaven. They didn't really go into the details. So they would say God is in a place called heaven. The angels are in a place called heaven. But they don't elaborate. They say up there. Even, you know, the Muslims will say Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. You know, Samawati, they will say up there, which means up where? Because we would say with right knowledge, right wisdom and understanding, we want to know the details. You can't just tell me up there, because I'm like, okay, up there you have the sky, you have planets, you have a solar system, you have galaxies, you have the universe. So up there where? The answer is in the Bible, because it tells you in Job 9:9, it mentions these places. It talks about, you know, Amos 5:8 talks about it. So when you go and read it, you realize, oh, these are constellations. So these beings are coming here. So when you say how they were created, you then have to go outside the planet Earth to these beings. And our ancestors being the Natharu, or the overseers, because whatever you see on the planet is a replica of what's outside the planet that came here. So we, as the original beings, as the original people on the planet, and it's not we're saying this is anthropologists, historians, archaeologists, findings, digging up fossils. It's now not even something that anybody would dispute that the Africans were here first. So then we would have to be the ones people consult to say, where did you come from if you were the first people here? So these beings from Orion, from Sirius, our ancestors, they seeded this planet, and then other beings came afterwards, and so many things was happening on the planet to the point where they decided to create what you're calling Adamite 6,000 years ago by genetically allowing other beings such as the Pleiadians to take, because when these other extraterrestrials started to come to the planet, they had to take something that was already here to create hybrids, or to, like, you can't start off from nothing. So many of these beings, they came here and they mixed with us or took our DNA and produced hybrids. And the Adamites were actually created. In fact, there's a video we've done on a Paratarak called I Was There, which is here, right? It might even be here. which explains what happened. So they basically created these beings because you have extraterrestrials that eat human beings as food, right? Just like humans, because when humans hear that, they feel, oh my goodness, how can we be eaten? But humans go to markets and to supermarkets and buy animals for food. Chickens, cows, sheep, they eat everything, right? So these extraterrestrial beings in the evolutionary chain, they eat humans. These draconians, right? Certain beings, not all of them, these draconians were eating these Pleiadians. So the Pleiadians said, okay, if we give you a substitute, will you stop eating us? They had an agreement. Just like if the chickens got together and say to humans, if we give you an alternative, can you stop eating us? And so what they did is they said yes. So they went about creating them a food source. But what they didn't realize is that our ancestors not only wanted to get rid of these draconians that were very disagreeable, but they planned it in such a way that the Adamites that they were going to create, them themselves will fade after a particular time. So it was a strategy to give them 6,000 years. And then after that 6,000 years, they would disappear. But by that time, the draconians would have eaten them and got sick, and they would also get killed, right? And so that's what happened. So the Pleiadians had to get the formula to create the Adamites, and then they did. And the way that our ancestors programmed it in the DNA was in the telomeres, right? The telomeres are chromosome. At the end of your chromosomes, you have telomeres at the end of that. Which, so if you had like an X chromosome, so you got X and Y, and at the end of the chromosomes, you have the telomeres. What they do is they determine. I'm just trying to. I don't know if that noise is gonna. So at the end of the telomeres at the end of the chromosomes is where you have the telomeres, which will basically tell you how long you can live for. So that's what's happened. So that 6,000 year period ended in the year 2000 AD. You see, so that's what the plan was. And the beings that created them were these Pleiadians, but they had to get that formula from us. Yeah. And you can read into more detail about that in actual fact called 18 plus 1, 18 plus 1, 37 genes of the mitochondrial DNA. That goes into a lot of detail. I'm going to wait for him because this... You sure? Yeah, so... Yeah, so did that answer the question? If not, you have to ask to clarify.
No problem. I'll talk to June about it, please. Okay. I think
Go ahead. Yeah, fine.
Thank you, Jay, for your service. Bye-bye.
Yeah. So
basically, from my understanding, and this is where I want to get a bit more national.
That's okay. It's all about you getting the clarity because we do cover a lot. So yeah, go ahead.
So originally, we were here on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Then because you've got Caucasians.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the Hindu people.
Okay.
And then you've got us. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So my question is, so there's an Anunnaki story,
mm-hmm.
and then there is the big-headed scientist, Yakub story.
Right.
Are they the same thing, or are they separate times?
Separate times. But let me help you out. When you say the way that scientists used to classify races on the planet, because people always wanting to know where did we come from, how did we get here, and so on. And they used to classify it as Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasoid, generally speaking. So the Negroid would be us as the Africans, and then what you were calling Asians would be the Mongoloids, and then the Caucasian would be the last one. Now they've actually, with the Human Genome Project, right, which is when you're studying hereditary and trying to study where people come from, this is the science which ties into the DNA. So the Human Genome Project was able to decipher the 24,000 genes that we have, and they're able to now tell you exactly where you come from. So the anthropologists have labeled the original as Homo naledi or Homo habilis. That deals with the African stock. And then you'll have the what they call the Denisovan or the Homo florensis as the Asian. That's everyone's, Koreans, Japanese, they're all in that group. And then you have the Neanderthal and what they call the Cro-Magnon as the Caucasian. So now they know for sure that we didn't all come from the same one tree. There's separate trees. So that kind of gives you the three in terms of the classification. We as the Natharu or the descendants, when we say descendants, we're talking about genetically as well as coming down here as in descending. We were seeded by our ancestors from Orion and from Sirius. The way they did that is they took their genetics and put it into a dolphin. And then the dolphins came here and they were in the waters. And then we evolved from they germinated the water and we evolved from the waters and came onto land. This is why when you go past the Christian story, in fact, starting from the smallest in terms of length and history, you go past the Islamic story, which is only 1400 years old, go to the New Testament, which is the Christian story, the modern version. It's 2,000 years old because they're talking about the life and times of Jesus. Then you go to the what they call the Old Testament, which is 4,004 years. Then you might go, okay, don't deal with Islam, don't deal with Christianity, don't deal with the Old Testament as in old Christianity. Where do they come from? Then you end up with Anunnaki because you end up in the Sumerian stories, right? The Sumerian stories is where you're getting the Anunnaki stories from, because these beings called Anunnaki, known by many names, they came here way afterwards when we were already here evolving, because when you go to the ancient Egyptian story, which is where ultimately the story of creation comes from, which was plagiarized into some of the Sumerian texts and then into what we call the Bible Qurans today. When you go to the Egyptian story, they talk about the Ogdoads and the 9 Enneads. These are beings that came out of the waters onto land. They talk about Atum, and they start to tell you about the creation story from the ancient Egyptian way. So the Anunnaki came way afterwards, where we were already here evolving as what they refer to as the Pataites, the Neolithic, the small people in the Nile Valley. You can go and research, Napata, Meroe, these places. So they came and they wanted to mine the gold because they were looking for gold to take back to their planet because they wanted to repair their ozone layer. The reason gold was used is because gold is a conductor, it's reflective, it can be made very thin and for long lengths. So, you can make gold as thin as paper. Anyway, so when they came here to mine the gold, the atmosphere was completely different at that time. They couldn't really deal with the atmosphere. So they decided that they were going to create a being to do the work. So they took the genetics of these Pataites that were already here on the planet, mixed their DNA with them to create what they call a Lulu Amilu. Then they set up shop calling it Iridu, which means home away from home, and to do the work. And that's how the Anunnaki stories come about, because you had Anu, who is the most high of the Sumerians. That's why in the Bible his name is left untranslated. It becomes the Most High. He sent his family, consisting of his 2 sons, Enlil and Enki, with their brothers and sisters to come here in groups of 50. And that's where the word Anunnaki translates as. Anu sending a group of 50, that's what Na means 50, to the planet Ki to come and do this work. So their whole story then comes into play. But then after that, you had other beings from other places, like beings from Nirvana, which settled in India, and where they're called Bali in India, and with the land where they call the 200 fallen angels were residing and all that kind of stuff. Then you had other beings from Sirius, like the shaggy beings that people call Bigfoot and so on. So different beings were coming here. In fact, they started to experiment, create all types of beings to show off what they could create. So it is a long story in the sense of some of these beings are very beast-like, and I could give you a list of different extraterrestrials. So the draconians that were eating the Pleiadians, they kidnapped. We had beings called Greys that our ancestors sent here to scout the planet and to basically like see if it was habitable. And these draconians used to kidnap them, and they created different hybrids from them too. And these are the ones that became, because they mixed their DNA with them, so they became violent, and a lot of them would abduct like animals. And, you know, animal mutilation was a big thing because these are scientists and they cut them up to see, because they don't have emotions. So they were trying to figure out a way of breeding with them to get emotions. So the story is a big story, but as you look on the planet today, every root race ties into these extraterrestrials. It's just that we were made to forget who we are, being the supreme beings, being the original, being the first, being the ones that did a lot of the things like built the pyramids and, you know, our language, etc. So after 6,000 years, because we got something known as amnesia, we forgot who we are. And the Caucasian, in terms of these Adamites, through going to different places and colonizing, they stripped you off even further of your language, your roots, your culture, to the point where most what we call black people on the planet don't even know who they are. But it was by design to last for the last 6,000 years. And now that 6,000 years has come to an end. And it came to an end in the year 2000. And so now the cycle is beginning again, where we're remembering who we are, because this information had to come by way of a being that was selected and chosen and sent to come and renew this 24,000 year cycle. And this is why now we are like waking up, remembering who we are, the findings, the DNA, the evidence that, you know, most of the scientists find proves what we're saying. So now it's about changing the planet, changing the world with the wrong information, with right information, which we call right knowledge. You see, that leads you to right knowledge to make you wise. Right wisdom takes you to right overstanding. When we were talking about overstanding, and when you reach that, you start to reason properly as a supreme being. And so our job is to teach and bring this information to the world, so that all the misconceptions, all the lies, all the stuff that has kept us, not just us, but humanity in general, from evolving and becoming these supreme beings, now is the time. So yeah, I hope that's answered the question. If not, again, probe further, because
yeah,
the more.
So you spoke about the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
Could you speak about the
the Yakub?
Yakub.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. So in the history of people trying to figure out where everyone comes from, the Caucasian, even though we are saying 6,000 years the Adamites were created, there was, prior to that, something known as the Flugerods, right? Which was, I spell it. So that was like what you're talking about with the Yakub stories. Flugerods, right? The Flugerods. That was 8,400 years ago. So they predate the Adamites. The Adamites are 6,000 years ago. So the Caucasians, if you want to call them that were 8,400 years ago, this is where the Yakub story comes from, because there were beings that were here known as the Teros, right? Because remember I said different beings came here, and a lot of them resided in the caverns in the earth. So you had different beings like the Donakil and the Teros. Yeah, the Teros, they're the ones that have like the cone-shaped heads, right? So anything you see on TV about aliens, like, it's not just entertainment, because there are actual facts behind it. So the Teros, they mixed, or one of the beings, because to keep peace, what they used to do is sign like treaties between different extraterrestrials, and they will take, but they did that by marriage, and that still happens till today. So when you want to know the story about what happened with Yaqub, there's a book called Shambhala and Agatha that the master teacher, Dr. York, has put out, where he explains that they took a Teros to marry a Danakil so they can create peace, but the person didn't want to be married to that person on the other side. So what ended up happening is that when Yaqub was born from this union, his head came out with two brains. So he had a big head and two brains, and he was ridiculed or teased by both sides of the family. So the Terror side as well as the Danakil side. So he vowed to get revenge, and he said he was going to create a being that's weak and wicked to show them that he was God because of what they were doing to him. So what he did was he went about trying to create this being that he would be over. But what happened is that, but he was being telepathically influenced by these Pleiadians that I mentioned before. And what he did was that he had a plan where he was taking any children that were born between the darker genes, getting rid of them, keeping the lighter versions. And then so he went from this thing where we call the brown, the Nation of Islam tried to explain this story as well, right? So he would go from the brown to the red to eventually create what he called a superior being, but it was really weak and wicked. And but he didn't actually live to see his plan complete, but he had people that were with him, working with him, the scientists, and he went around the coast of Africa, and a lot of those beings that he was creating would either jump off board or they would kind of like die and stuff. So, but eventually that's where the flu gods were created of 8,400 years ago. And then they eventually mixed with the Caucasians that were in the Caucasus Mountains. And this is where the beings that came from the shaggy beings that we've got, they call them Bigfoot. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. These, as you can see, you got the black, the brown, and the kind of blonde being. This is where you see they got fur. So when you look at Caucasians today, they have those types of hair, or what people call hair, but the fur, right? Because of those beings. So what happened is that, yeah, they basically mixed with these two, and that's where the confusion comes in when a lot of people talk about, you know, Yaqub, they don't know about that story of that being and how he came about, and his brain eventually exploded because yeah, he was just kind of like the mad scientist. We actually got a video on this as well on YouTube about Yaqub and the whole story, where you went through the whole lot of how he came about. So yeah, that's your Yaqub story in a very summarized way.
Yes.
Yeah. But then you had like the Nation of Islam, and certain people would teach about it, but they didn't go into the detail or didn't have the full explanation.
So can I say, so with this story, there's a connection between what you said earlier about the Draconians and the Pleiades.
Yeah.
And the Yaqub story.
Yes.
So the new creation was the food source.
Yeah.
The Draconians.
Yeah.
And that's, so it all ties
together. It all ties in. Yeah. When you start to look at how they Pleiadians influence.
That's right.
Yeah. It all ties in.
Yeah.
Everything ties in. It's just that the puzzle that you're putting together has information going back millions of years, but you're given a 6,000-year-old story from the Bible. This is why we were saying that when you start off with the Bible and you're just told God started that create, then they're not telling you that that's really talking about the Adamites creation. Yeah, that's why there were people already on the planet in different parts and so forth. So everything ties in, and what Wu-Sabat does is demystifies everything, but everyone's at different levels based on what they know, and we have to try and make it make sense for them. But we don't know where you're at until you ask me a question. Because if you didn't mention Yaqub, I would not even know that you have even come across that story before. So sometimes we will leave parts out when we're breaking things down until someone asks a question, and then we're like, oh, we'll go back and tidy it up and give you the information to kind of make it make sense for you. But no one on the planet right now is doing what we do in terms of putting it all together. Because the thing about it is the language as well. You have to know, like, the origins of where everything's coming from. And the only people are going to give you the origins or be able to go back is the people that were there during the time. You see, so a lot of times we are being taught by Europeans who give you what they call history, which we know now. Everyone should know this by now, that history is his story. This is what I was saying about the language. Again, they play with words. So his story is only based on what he knows, or he can only go back so far. And then he has to hand over to us and say, I don't know. But the thing is, arrogance, racism, and all these things come into play because they were taught not through any fault of their own. I'm saying, like what we were saying before, if you grow up thinking you're superior and everyone else is beneath you and lower than you and don't know anything, we're the barbarians and we're the beast, and then when you do the research, you start saying, okay, but we built the pyramids, which till this day, no one can figure out the maths. So we must be very intelligent. Then you start to go back and look at what we've done in history, where the gold, the platinum, the cobalt, all the things that make you feel that you're almighty because you're living deliciously from our resources. And you see what's going on in the world right now, where Africa is saying, no, we've had enough. So unfortunately, if you're just brought up thinking, like Americans get this as well. Americans, because they grow up in America and they watch all the movies, all the superheroes, all the stars are American. So Americans have this kind of delusion that they're the greatest because Rocky, the best, Superman, Spider-Man, name all they're always American heroes. So I'm saying that to say that a lot of Americans who've never left America to come to Europe or go to different parts of the world, they get shocked when they find out that, you know, there's life outside America, you know, and the same thing they do with Tarzan being the king of the jungle in Africa, you know, a Caucasian running around with his underwear that all of a sudden can speak the language of all the animals, but the natives that are there don't know how to do this. But, you know, this great white hope comes and he swings from tree to tree and he controls, and, you know, it's all programming, it's all lies. And these are the types of things that we have to demystify. God is someone that, again, they've given you this fictitious story until you start breaking it down. Like, does he really know everything? When you look at it, he doesn't. He didn't know he was going to create a being that's going to go bad. So how can you know everything? You see? So, yeah, Wu-Sabat is here to really help anyone on the planet, Plan ET, to kind of know what's going on. But yeah, the story is big. The story goes into outside the planet, goes into the creation of the universe, you know, and this is the level of intelligence that supreme beings have. They deal with things on a much greater scale. We're not really just worried about the mundane things that you do down here as a demon or as a beast, as a person that is not acting off of real intelligence. Yeah. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, go on.
Sorry, just one more.
Okay, last one. Go ahead.
Yeah. we've written down their mind, soul, and spirit.
Yeah.
Could you give me a breakdown on each, including the body?
Okay.
Yeah, mind, spirit, soul, body.
All right. Right. So when we start here going upwards, right, you have to remember that you got to go. Okay, no problem. All right, yeah, we're here. Yeah, after this, I need to eat. All right, cool. In a bit, take care. Right. When you look at this hierarchy from bulls, demon, beast, man, human, going upwards, you have to remember that we also have the realms that we live in. So the bottom realm is known as the physical realm, the material world, the hard things that people touch. But the thing is, that's dealing with the lowest vibration. So as you go up, you have higher densities. So really, you're going from up here, you're dealing with density, beings that exist in what you call gases, right? Or in states that are not as tangible as the ones down in the physical material plane. So you will have density, then you deal with matter, because matter starts to break things down in a physical way, but still what we call micro, right? So then you have, from matter, you get to atoms, atoms being the building blocks, right? So when you get to atoms, you're like, atoms are put together to create cells. So the cells are what you're dealing with your body when you start to look at your cells, right? Those cells form organs. So an organ is composed of many cells. And then those organs, as in your liver, your lung, form limbs, then form your body, right? The body is what you're looking at, the physical part of you. But as you break you down from this material physical world, going upwards to where you're dealing with beings that are pure energy beings, you're slowing down the vibration, all right? So when you're looking at this now, I didn't add the rest, but really you're starting off with what we call the physical or the material. Then you go up, even those have layers, right? So then you have what you call the plane of force, because the plane of force has an effect on the physical world and things in the physical. But then you go up to the spirit, right? You go up to the soul. You go up to the mental, which we call the mind, right? Mental. And as you keep going, you're going to start going up to levels above this known as ether, or the etheric you, which is that pure energy being, yeah? But there are different levels of 9 levels of them. So if you imagine the lowest being 1 in the physical here, so that's 1, then you go all the way up to 9. The reason we say 9 is because mathematically in the physical world, 9 is the highest number, because after 9, you just get compound numbers. Yeah, a combination of the numbers from 0 to 9. But then if you keep going to the highest number, you're going to get to what they call 9 to the 9th power of 9, yeah? Or they say infinity. So I'm saying that as a being, I know this board is a bit messed up, but supreme beings are operating at the highest vibration, or 9 ether. 9 ether is a combination of all existing gases and conscience gases, which slow down in vibration to becoming matter. And you have 2 opposite spectrums where, coming to the physical world, you start with, as I said, those atoms. You've got the hydrogen, the helium, coming to the physical. And then going the other way, you get to E numbers, which is E1, E2, going to the etheric realm, which exist, but in a much finer, higher vibration. Now, beings who know how, they can slow down, and the molecular structure, they could actually change it and adapt it as they come down to take on physical bodies. We do the same thing, but not at will. So we get born through the black hole of your mother, where you come out through that hole, but it takes 9 months, they say, in the womb for you to go through that process of coming from pure energy, right, to being matter, yeah, to being atoms, to being cells, to form organs, to form a body, and then you come out to this world. But beings that have elevated to a very high level, they can do that at will, slow their vibration and come here, and materialize. So that's what you're saying when you're saying, but not every being can have the ability to vibrate on, say, the soul level, because they don't have a soul. Why is that? Because you can lose your soul if you mix with animals, or if you're operating down here where you're dealing with beasts. Yeah, because animals don't have souls. So if you mix with them, there are rules as well when you're dealing with these these different realms. So on a particular realm, you can't go if you eat animals, for example, or if you're partaking in, like blood meats and things like that. So it's a good question, because this side ties into the side that we looked at before, where beasts and demons and man and mammal and people that are just operating on a animalistic nature, they're down here. Beings that go higher, dealing with the soul and the mind and the ether, they are vibrating on a higher level. And that's what we have been taught, to remember that we're supreme beings. And to get back to that stage, you've got to let go of this behavior down here as being a demon, a beast, or just a human. Yeah. So that's how it ties in.
Thank you very much, man.
No problem. You're welcome.